The cabin stood like a lone guardian against the merciless winter, its rough-hewn wooden walls creaking under the weight of snow piled high on the slanted roof. Each log bore the marks of time, deep grooves and dark stains from decades of enduring storms. A faint trail of smoke spiraled from a crooked chimney, vanishing quickly into the pale, storm-laden sky. Beyond the cabin's weathered exterior, a blizzard raged with unrelenting fury, turning the world outside into a swirling abyss of white and shadow. The wind howled through the trees like an ancient predator, carrying with it the sharp bite of frozen air. Every gust hurled shards of snow against the cabin's outer walls, each impact echoing like soft, distant drumbeats. Inside, the contrast was almost otherworldly. The air glowed with the warm, golden radiance of a roaring fireplace, its flames dancing hungrily over split logs that hissed and crackled as they burned. Shadows stretched and retreated along the cabin's walls, moving like living things, cast by the flicker of firelight against the uneven wood. The scent of burning pine filled the room, mingling with the faint metallic tang of melted snow. In the far corner, a lantern's steady amber glow added a secondary warmth, its halo pooling softly over the floorboards, catching on droplets of water and ice scattered near the threshold. The wooden floor was slick with moisture, a thin sheen reflecting the orange glow from the hearth. Snowflakes drifted lazily down from the open doorway, dissolving into tiny rivulets that crept toward the center of the room. Outside that doorway, the storm was a violent, living thing. Gusts of wind hurled entire clouds of snow inward in sudden bursts, as if trying to invade the fragile sanctuary. Beyond the swirling frost, a faint silhouette moved, a figure standing just outside, half swallowed by the white chaos, a dark shape framed by the glowing rectangle of the doorway. The structure of the cabin told its own story. The thick beams overhead bore the weight of countless winters, their darkened surfaces etched with knife marks and scratches, perhaps from tools, perhaps from something far less ordinary. Gaps between the logs were stuffed with aged insulation, some frayed and jutting out, fluttering slightly each time the wind found its way inside. A sturdy table sat against the far wall, its surface worn smooth in places and scarred in others, as though it had served not just for meals, but for countless unspoken rituals and tasks. The air itself hummed with a stillness, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional thunderous bang of wind colliding with the door. The lighting was pure cinematic magic. On one side, the deep orange and gold of the hearth's flames painted everything in a tender glow, softening edges, wrapping the space in comfort. On the other, the cold light from outside sliced into the room like the edge of a blade, pale and unyielding. That clash of warmth and cold created an unmissable tension, as if the cabin itself existed between two worlds, one of safety and shelter and one of relentless, hostile wilderness. Outside, the forest was invisible beyond the blizzard's curtain, but the faint dark outlines of snow-laden pines loomed like specters, bending under the storm's assault. The air beyond the door swirled with fragments of ice that glistened under the faint silver light of an obscured moon. Every so often, the wind shifted just enough to send a spiraling torrent of snow into the cabin, scattering frost across the floor and sending a shiver of cold across the warm interior. The atmosphere was more than just a setting. It was a presence, breathing, watching. Every creak of the wood seemed to echo louder than it should, every hiss of snow on the roof whispering with hidden meaning. The cabin was both a sanctuary and a cage, holding back the blizzard while also sealing in the strange, electric tension that clung to the air. It was a place where warmth fought desperately against the cold, where safety teetered on the edge of something unknown, something dangerous. And in that fragile balance, a story was about to unfold. She sat upon the slick wooden floor like a vision torn from the heart of winter itself. Her skin, impossibly smooth, shimmered in shades of deep and pale blue, tones that shifted and danced like moonlight on frozen water. Drops of melted frost slid down her arms, and along the curve of her collarbone, catching the firelight and scattering it into glimmers that almost hurt to look at. It was as if each droplet carried a piece of some forgotten magic, alive only for as long as it clung to her. Her presence bent the room's air. The warmth of the cabin clashed against the biting cold that radiated from her, creating a tangible tension between comfort and danger. Her eyes were unlike anything found in the mortal world, glacial yet burning with an inner fire. They glowed faintly, catching both the gold of the flames and the silver of the storm outside. Every glance seemed heavy, deliberate, as though she could peer past the surface of anyone she looked at and see the truth buried beneath. Strands of her midnight black hair clung to her damp skin, tangled in the dark threads that wound across her body. These threads were not mere fabric. They pulsed faintly, like veins of some otherworldly energy, twisting around her arms, waist, and thighs, as if keeping something contained, or perhaps keeping something hidden from escaping. Her form was both graceful and unsettling. She wore little, just enough to veil modesty, but each piece seemed as though it had been woven from shadows and ice, clinging to her curves in ways that defied the natural. Her bare feet rested in the shallow puddles forming from the melting snow, toes pale and delicate, nails gleaming faintly like tiny shards of crystal. Every part of her radiated fragility, and yet there was a strength beneath it, a predator's patience, a readiness to move if the moment demanded. The way she sat was telling. One leg folded beneath her, the other stretched toward the door as though some invisible force had tried to pull her back outside. Her spine was slightly curved, shoulders forward, but her head tilted up with a quiet defiance. The firelight painted one half of her face in golden shadow, while the other half gleamed cold and blue under the invading snowlight from the door. It was a face sculpted for legends. High cheekbones dusted with frost, lips parted ever so slightly as though she were caught between a sigh and a warning. Small details betrayed her struggle. Her breathing was slow, almost controlled, but the rise and fall of her chest was deeper than mere calm would allow. Each exhale released a faint mist into the warmer air, a reminder of the chill that clung to her being. A thin line of water traced down her thigh, pooling briefly before being swallowed into the wood grain beneath her. Her fingers, resting lightly on the floor, bore the faintest traces of ice along the nails, the crystals catching the lantern light like jewels. The threads on her skin seemed alive. At times, they shifted almost imperceptibly, tightening against her, reacting to the man's silhouette in the doorway. They weren't just decoration. They felt like a binding, an enchantment woven in darkness. Where they touched her skin, they seemed to pulse with heat one moment and shimmer with frost the next, as though two opposing forces were locked in battle right there on her body. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was something dangerous in her stillness. The room seemed quieter when her gaze fixed on something, as if even the fire knew better than to crackle too loudly in her presence. There was no fear in her expression. If anything, there was the faintest trace of amusement in the corner of her mouth, as though she were humoring the man at the door, waiting for him to make the first mistake. Her aura filled the space. She was not simply in the cabin. She was claiming it, altering its energy. The storm outside seemed to answer to her, every gust syncing with the faint rhythm of her breath. She was winter's heartbeat wrapped in human form, a paradox of warmth and cold, fragility and power, beauty and danger. Whoever she was, she did not belong to this world, and yet here she sat, as if daring it to challenge her. Her garments were not of this world, neither sewn by mortal hands, nor made from any fabric known to humankind. They clung to her form like whispers of shadow and shards of ice, each piece shifting subtly as if alive, as though breathing with her. The primary layer was not cloth, but a weave of dark, smoke-like threads that coiled and uncoiled across her body. These strands were impossibly thin, yet impossibly strong, and carried a faint, pulsing glow-deep within their blackness. At first glance, they seemed like tattered ribbons caught in the wind, but upon closer inspection, their movements were deliberate, reactive, as if they could sense both danger and desire. The threads wound around her torso in a complex pattern, crossing over her chest and ribs in a way that seemed both protective and seductive. Tiny frost crystals clung to them, refracting the firelight into flashes of blue and silver. Around her waist, the weave thickened, forming a kind of belt that wasn't fixed, but constantly shifting, tightening, loosening, and reshaping itself with every subtle change in her posture. It gave the impression that her very clothing was an extension of her will, a second skin bound by ancient magic. From that belt, strands trailed downward to wrap loosely around her hips and thighs, leaving glimpses of bare, frost-kissed skin between the gaps. These lower threads were studded with fragments of ice that never melted, no matter how close they came to the heat of the fireplace. The ice itself was unnaturally clear, as if each piece was a frozen tear or a drop of captured moonlight. They chimed faintly when she moved, producing a sound that was somewhere between glass tapping and the whisper of falling snow. Her shoulders were bare except for thin straps of the same shadow thread, but from one of them draped a small fragment of translucent fabric, so fine it was nearly invisible unless it caught the light. When it did, it shimmered with faint blues and purples, like the northern lights condensed into cloth. This small piece shifted in color, depending on whether the light came from the fire or the storm, changing from warm gold to icy silver in an instant. Around her neck rested a single accessory, a collar-like band woven from a mix of black thread and icy crystal. At its center, where a pendant might be, sat a shard of something not entirely identifiable, clear as glass, yet deep as an ocean, with swirls of light trapped within. The shard seemed to pulse faintly in sync with her heartbeat, each rhythm sending a small ripple of frost across its surface. This was not decoration. It was a focus, a talisman, perhaps even the source of her power, or the seal keeping it contained. Her wrists bore no bracelets, yet the threads wrapped around them in intricate loops, forming patterns that looked like runes when viewed from certain angles. These runes shifted slowly, never staying in the same configuration for more than a moment, as though constantly rewriting themselves in response to unseen forces. The magic within them was palpable. Standing too close would make the fine hairs on your skin rise, as if a storm were building just under the surface of reality. Her bare feet, pale as polished marble, were unadorned except for the frost that crept up from the puddles on the floor, wrapping around her toes like delicate lace. The cold didn't seem to bother her. If anything, it seemed to feed her. The frost spread in delicate, fractal patterns, extending a few inches up her ankles before merging seamlessly with the dark threads that clung there. Every element of her clothing seemed to serve more than one purpose. It was armor, binding, and seduction all at once, a paradoxical combination of vulnerability and control. The threads could just as easily be used to strangle as they could to caress. The ice could cut as easily as it could dazzle, and the luminous shard at her throat could either protect or destroy. The overall effect was hypnotic. She was dressed as if the night sky, a blizzard, and the memory of fire had been woven together into a single form. Every shift of her body made the threads slither and shimmer, the ice glint, and the colors ripple in a way that defied natural law. This was no mere outfit. It was a living extension of her soul, an outward manifestation of the forces that defined her: darkness, frost, and dangerous beauty. The storm outside had not paused, not even for a heartbeat. Yet inside the cabin, time seemed to stretch thin, like glass about to shatter. The open doorway was a mouth through which winter roared, its breath carrying fistfuls of snow that scattered across the floorboards in wild, swirling bursts. Each gust rattled the wooden frame with a hollow thud, as though the blizzard were trying to batter its way fully inside. The temperature dropped with every blast, sending a sharp bite through the air that made the fire hiss in protest. She did not flinch. The ice enchantress remained seated, her stillness deliberate, almost regal. Her damp hair stirred only slightly in the gusts, the dark magical threads across her skin rippling like they were sensing the intrusion. One particularly violent burst of wind sent a flurry of snow spiraling past her, scattering droplets onto her bare shoulders. The frost didn't melt on her. Instead, it seemed to settle deeper, as though the storm were claiming her as its own. Then movement in the doorway. The silhouette of the man became clearer, a tall figure, broad in the shoulders, framed in a halo of swirling white. Snow clung to his coat, his hood casting his face in shadow, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. He stood motionless for a second, as if deciding whether to step into the firelit room or remain in the embrace of the blizzard. The moment felt charged, like the breath before lightning splits the sky. The enchantress's gaze locked onto him, her chin tilting just slightly upward. It was not a look of surprise, it was a summons. The threads on her body responded instantly, tightening in certain places, loosening in others, like a serpent adjusting its coils. They gave off a faint hum, a vibration that seemed to sink into the wooden floor and hum in the soles of the man's boots. The fire popped loudly, a single ember snapping into the air between them. At that precise instant, a gust tore through the open door, shoving the man forward a step. The snow burst inward like a living thing, tiny shards swirling in chaotic patterns, clinging to the air as if gravity had been suspended. The frost-laden wind wrapped around the enchantress, her threads fluttering and twisting, catching flakes that shimmered briefly before vanishing. Her right hand shifted, fingers spreading slightly, palm angled toward the floor. The water pooling beneath her rippled outward, disturbed by an unseen force. Droplets rose into the air around her fingers, catching both firelight and icy moonlight in a prism of impossible colors. She didn't speak, but the gesture was a warning. She controlled this space, and the storm outside might as well be her own weapon. The man stepped inside at last, his boots landing heavily on the wet boards. The snow clinging to his coat began to melt almost instantly under the heat of the fire, sending thin streams of water trickling to the floor. The door swung halfway shut behind him, but didn't close completely, leaving the storm free to keep sending its icy messengers inside. He paused only a few steps in, his eyes adjusting to the glow. Something in the cabin's air shifted then, subtle but undeniable. The firelight seemed to grow richer, casting longer shadows, while the pale blue illumination from the open door intensified. The two lights collided in the center of the room, painting the air in contrasting colors. She was perfectly framed between them, half warmth, half winter, her body poised like a queen awaiting tribute. A sudden crack outside, a branch breaking under the weight of ice, echoed through the forest, but neither of them turned to look. Instead, the enchantress slowly rose from her seated position. The threads adjusted as she stood, sliding smoothly over her skin, tightening around her waist and shoulders. Snowflakes still hung in the air from the last gust, suspended in her aura like they were reluctant to touch the ground. The man shifted his stance, one hand inching toward the hilt of something hidden under his coat. Her eyes flicked to the movement, and without lifting a finger, the temperature in the cabin dropped another few degrees. Frost began to bloom along the edges of the table and the window frames, spreading with a speed that suggested no ordinary cold. The storm outside roared louder, sinking with her silent will. It no longer felt like weather. It felt like an army at her command, waiting for her signal. Every object in the room seemed to lean toward the moment, toward the inevitable clash that hung in the charged space between them. This scene is a study in visual contrast, where warmth and cold are locked in a constant duel, each claiming half the frame. The lighting is split into two distinct sources. The golden, flickering glow of the fireplace to the left and the pale, silver-blue wash of moonlight, and snow from the open doorway to the right. The fire's light is rich and textured, bathing the wooden cabin walls in deep amber and burnt orange, while casting heavy, dynamic shadows that shift with every crackle of the flames. In contrast, the moonlight from outside is sharp, cold, and unforgiving, cutting into the room with surgical precision and outlining every drifting snowflake in crystalline clarity. The color palette is meticulously balanced. On one end of the spectrum, we have saturated warm tones, gold, amber, and deep chestnut from the firelight, that give the left side of the scene a sense of life and refuge. On the opposite end, we see an icy blend of blues, whites, and faint purples that wash over the right side, evoking the unforgiving beauty of the winter storm. Between them lies a delicate gradient, where warm and cold bleed into each other without fully mixing, creating a tension that is both visual and emotional. The enchantress herself is the bridge between these worlds, her blue-tinged skin kissed by amber highlights, her dark threads shimmering with both frost and fire. Camera positioning places the viewer at a mid-level angle, about waist height, as though they are standing just inside the room, witnessing the standoff between the enchantress and the man in the doorway. The perspective is slightly off-center, giving the shot a sense of asymmetry that heightens the unease. The enchantress is framed slightly to the left of center, with her gaze and body angled toward the right, leading the viewer's eyes directly to the silhouette in the doorway. This subtle composition ensures that the space between them becomes the focal point, a silent battlefield of energy. Depth of field is carefully controlled. The enchantress is in razor-sharp focus, her skin texture, frost crystals, and the fine weave of magical threads rendered with ultra-realistic detail. The background, especially the forest beyond the open door, is slightly blurred but still defined enough to suggest the chaos of the storm. Snowflakes nearest the camera are captured in midair, each one a frozen sculpture, lit differently depending on whether it falls in the firelight or moonlight. Textures are a major storytelling tool here. The rough grain of the wooden walls contrasts with the smooth, almost glass-like sheen of the ice on the floor. Her threads appear tactile, half silk, half shadow, while the frost on her skin looks so tangible you can almost feel the chill radiating from it. The fire's light gives the wood a living warmth, highlighting its imperfections, while the cold moonlight flattens surfaces, making them appear lifeless and brittle. This push and pull of textures mirrors the emotional tone of the scene, alive versus frozen, safety versus danger. The movement within the frame is subtle but constant. The fire flickers and throws shifting light patterns onto her body and the surrounding floor. Snow drifts in lazy spirals from the open door, their paths altered slightly by the enchantress's aura. The threads on her body respond to her breathing, their movements slight but deliberate, drawing the eye again and again. The man in the doorway is still, but the storm around him churns, his silhouette occasionally disappearing behind bursts of wind-driven snow. Shadows are deep and deliberate, not just as a byproduct of lighting, but as active compositional elements. The darkest shadows pool at the far corners of the cabin, hinting at unseen depths, while the space beneath the enchantress's body is dappled with complex patterns from the dancing firelight. Her shadow stretches toward the doorway, elongated and distorted, visually connecting her to the man even before they move toward each other. In an 8K ultra-high-resolution rendering, every droplet, every thread fiber, every frost crystal is defined. You can see the faint condensation of her breath, the minute crack lines in the ice, the subtle reflection of the fire in the man's eyes. The dynamic range is vast, bright highlights on snowflakes, deep blacks in the corners, and an expansive mid-tone range that preserves the richness of wood, skin, and fabric. The final frame is cinematic, not just in style but in feeling. It invites the viewer to linger, to absorb every detail, to feel the tension between light and dark, warmth and cold, safety and threat. It is not merely a still image, it's the breath before the storm inside the storm.